Hello guys, welcome to a new chapter of Empress Dowager 3 Cixi, Part 3, Ruling Through an Adopted Son, 1875 to 1889. Chapter 10, A 3-year-old is made emperor, 1875. Cixi was by her son's side when he died on that January evening in 1875. Just before his death, the grandees had rushed in, having been informed by doctors of the emperor's imminent demise, and they had found him barely breathing and Cixi to choke with tears to speak. After staying for a while, they left the room, leaving the last moments to the mother and son. Shortly after the emperor's death was announced, while they were all still crying, they were summoned by the Empress Dowager, who wanted to make arrangements for the future. The instinctive reaction of the ever-prudent Prince Gong was to stay away. Knowing Cixi, perhaps he sensed that her arrangements would be irregular, and he hesitated to be involved. But he nevertheless went in with the rest of the grandees. Cixi frankly asked them whether they thought it was a good idea for her, an Empress sent, to continue at the helm, behind the screen. One man immediately answered yes. Could the Empress Dowager please, for the sake of the empire, name a new emperor and continue to rule as before? At this, Cixi declared, on behalf of Empress Sen as well, the two of us have made our decisions and we're in complete agreement. We are now giving you our definitive word, which may not be altered or modified. Listen and obey. This tremendously forceful language came from a position of strength. Emperor Cixi had left no heir, nor had he left a will dictating who should succeed him, and just before he died, he had asked the two Dowager Empresses to run the empire. It was now up to them to designate the next monarch. Cixi announced that the two of them would adopt a son for their late husband, and themselves, a child who would be raised by them. It was obvious that Cixi intended to rule the empire again as the Empress Dowager, and to do so for as long as possible. The normal and correct thing to do would have been to adopt an heir for her late son, but if that were to happen, it would be hard for Cixi, the grandmother, to justify the rule. Emperor Cixi's widow, Miss Aliut, was still alive at the time, and she would have become the Dowager Empress, and yet Cixi's irregular arrangement roused no objection. Most welcome her return to power. She had done an outstanding job prior to her son's succession. In contrast, her son's brief reign promised only disaster. Indeed, nearly all of them had been willfully rebuked, and quite a few dismissed by the late emperor, and who knew what would have happened if Cixi had not been around to bring him to heel. That she would be holding the reins again came as a huge relief, especially for the reformers, who had been frustrated by the stagnation of the last few years. Then Cixi named the new emperor, Saitian, the 3-year-old son of her sister and Prince Chun. Prince Chun was in the room, and the announcement, far from delighting him, sent him into terrified frenzy. Kneeling in front of the throne, he fell into convulsions, howling and knocking his head on the ground until he passed out, a heap of court gown and underclothing. The boy was his only son at the time, and was treasured by him and his wife almost with desperation, not least because their previous son had died. It seemed that he was losing his only son forever. Cixi, looking utterly unmoved, ordered that the prince be taken out of the hall. According to an eyewitness, he lay in a corner with no one paying him any attention. It was a wretched and desolate scene. The Grand Councilors withdrew to draw up the imperial decree proclaiming the new emperor. Shaking with tension, the man designated to write it out could not hold the brush steady. Watching this, Yung Lu, the then Lord Chamberlain, a man who was fiercely devoted to Cixi, became so anxious that an objection might be raised before the job was done, that he grabbed the brush and started to write the decree himself, which was absolutely improper, as he was not a Grand Councilor. Yung Lu apparently had helped Cixi make up her mind to name the new emperor immediately after her son's death, so as to give no one the opportunity to speak or act against his decision. Nothing went wrong for Cixi. In no time the formalities of establishing a monarch were completed, and a procession was dispatched to fetch the new emperor. Before the first rays of dawn, The 3-year-old had been woken up, separated from his mother, wrapped in a heavy court gown, put into a sedan chair with an official by his side, and carried into the Forbidden City amidst lanterns and candles and made to kowtow to Cixi and Empress in a dark hall. He was then taken to the bed where the dead Emperor Cixi was laying to perform the obligatory wailing, which he did quite naturally as his sleep had been disturbed. Thus began the new life of Emperor Guangxu, Emperor of the Glorious Succession. This was Cixi's moment of revenge on Prince Chung. For the anguish she had suffered over Little Lan's execution, she now twisted a knife into the prince's heart by taking away his only son, and she did it in such a way that Prince Chung could hardly complain. After all, his son had been elevated to emperor. Making the son of Prince Chung, the emperor removed him from his political role. As the emperor's biological father but not the official regent, the prince was compelled to resign all his posts to avoid any potential accusation that he was using his influence to meddle in state affairs, a crime tantamount to prison. The prince offered his resignation at once, couching it in an extremely humble language. Cixi told the grandees to discuss it, and Prince Gong forcefully recommended its acceptance. Among the reasons he gave was a protocol conflict. As an official, Prince Chung had to prostrate himself in front of the emperor, but as a father to his son, this was out of the question. Grand Tutor Wang, a conservative ally of Prince Chung, saw that with the prince gone, there would be no one to resist the reformers, and argued that the prince should retain one key post, that of the head of the Praetorian Guard. Cixi rejected the suggestion and accepted Prince Chun's wholesale resignation. She did keep one job for him, one that did not have any real power. He was to look after the mausoleums of the Qin emperors, and of course she showered him with honors. By depriving Prince Chun of any serious position, Cixi effectively silenced him. Any protest from him against her policies would now be deemed interfering in state affairs and would invite condemnation. Prince Chung was clearly alive to Cixi's intention. Fearing she might go even further and find an excuse to charge him with high treason, he wrote her an abject letter assuring her that he had no intention of meddling. Prince Chung was finished as the champion of the xenophobic camp. The ticking time bomb for the empire was thus defused. The prince was yet to suffer more personal tragedy. Cixi's sister gave birth to 2 more sons, but one lived for only a day and a half and the other died after a few years, the victim of too much anxious love, according to the servants. The couple were perpetually worried that he might overeat, a major problem for children in rich families, and as a result the child suffered malnutrition. To the prince's surprise, Cixi did not actually want to destroy him. Having demonstrated that she could have finished him off, she bestowed favors on Chung. She gave him concubines, and the prince was able to have 3 more sons. The eldest, born in 1883, was given his name, Sai Feng, by Cixi. She also made the prince the supervisor of the child emperor's education to give him access to his son. The prince's wife, Cixi's sister, was invited to stay in the palace from time to time, so that she too could see him. Neither parent felt fully able to relax with the child, now that he was the emperor and had been adopted by Cixi. Both her treatment of him was beyond Prince Chun's expectations, and he was overwhelmed with gratitude. Cixi won over the prince's friends as well, by showing them that she bore no grudge, and by skillfully buying them off. She made Grand Tutor Wang the chief tutor for the new child emperor, for which the tutor felt eternally grateful, and she gave Governor Ding, the man who actually had Little Lan executed, the promotions and honors due to him as if nothing untoward had happened. When the governor was promoted to viceroy, he followed the Qin practice and went to Beijing for an audience. Before his arrival through Zhonglu, the Lord Chamberlain, Cixi gave him 10,000 taels to help him with his expenses in the capital, where there was much obligatory entertainment and present giving. Ding was short of money. As an uncorrupt man, he had not taken advantage of his official positions to make money for himself. Zhonglu presented the gift as coming from himself, but Ding, who was not a particular friend of his, understood where it had come from. He not only accepted it, but wrote and asked to borrow another 10,000 tiles, which Junglu readily delivered. This was the old man's somewhat mischievous way of sending the message that he knew Cixi was the donor. He would not have asked another official for more after all, and that he was striking a deal with her. Although both Ding and Grand Tutor went retain their conservative views, they never again made trouble for the Empress Dowager. And so Cixi removed all obstacles and steered the empire back on the course that she had first chartered. This time she would speed up the pace of progress. During her forced seclusion in the harem, her mind had not been idle, and she had learned much about the outside world from the reports and diaries of the travelers that she had sent on those early journeys. Western-style newspapers in Hong Kong and the treaty ports had grown in number and were available to the court, where they had become an indispensable source of information. Compared with a decade ago, when she first came to power, Cixi now had a much better understanding not only of the West, but also of modernity. She was convinced that modernization was the answer to the empire's problems, and she also knew that much time had been lost. Since the deadly warning conveyed by the execution of Little Anne, through the reign of her son, the country had stood still for 5 years, and she was definitely up to make up for that lost time.